The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. We're live this morning. The date is the 14th of May. And we're very excited. We had a cancellation in the show, but we also had an amazing parent write in with a question. And so we pivoted and decided that we would cover the topic that the parent had written in about. So thanks to Upstate Sue's, we're going to be talking today about how to handle special diets within the context of school and a little bit when you're on the go, because it's hard enough at home. How do you trust and do that when your child is someplace else? Someplace where you don't have a whole lot of control. So we're going to get started with that in just a minute, but I want to start by reminding all of you that we're live right now. It is May 14th. We haven't pre-taped this show. I know we've been doing a lot of pre-tapes, and we will be doing pre-tapes the next 2 weeks so that our fabulous Chris Desmond can have some vacation because he has earned it. And Chris, speaking of Chris, he's showing you some of the different ways that you can participate on the show. It's funny, I had a very interesting conversation the other day where I talked about how there's so many of you or people that are on constantly on, Instagram and other things like that. And they're just being super honest about their day. And I always go, oh my gosh, first of all, I just don't think people are that interested in the minutia of my life. But I also don't know, like when you're in the middle of stuff, being honest, that's not really like, I'll be as honest as anything with you. I'll tell you all the ins and outs after I'm through the thick of it. When I'm in the middle of it, I don't usually talk about things. But for today, I'm going to just tell you, I'm somebody that has regular AFib. You see all those commercials for AFib and, you have to be on a blood thinner and all these things. I have pretty regular AFib. And, my doctor estimates that at certain times of the year, it's 20% of the time I'm in AFib. And it means that my heart beats irregularly and sometimes fast. And it's a little bit like being on a treadmill. It's hard for me to catch my breath. So it affects when I talk. I'm in AFib this morning, and I'm telling you that because I'm going to try to get through this. But if I pause sometimes to breathe, I don't want you to be worried. I am on all the medications. Sometimes talking helps it to get back under control, we hope. Sometimes it makes me dizzy. So if I have to pause or if we have to quit, I want you to know that's what's going on. But I'm fine. Lots of people live with this, and I'm on the medications, and I have my little Cardia Mobile so that I can feel it. It's more for the doctor that I can show them, yep, I felt it, and this is what happened. So yes, a little out of breath. Anyway, but it's a great topic, and I wanted to be here with you guys. So let me just say that we're live right now on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Please write in. If you're somebody who also has that, hi, Michelle, if you have that flippy floppy heart arrhythmia thing too, feel free to, send me some love on that because it's just not fun. There's lots of things you can do. And so far I have turned down ablation because what I want is to be off the medicine, and that won't do it for me. But anyway, we're all living with something, right? And we do the very level best that we can. So I mentioned we're live right now. We love to have you write in. Tell me that you're watching. That's so meaningful to me. You guys have no idea how meaningful it is when you guys write in or send me an email. It's great. Also want to let you know that we have, see there I am, out of breath. We have 2 very robust YouTube channels. There's Autism Live, and there is Ask Dr. Doreen. You can subscribe to them. You can visit them. We're in our 15th year of production now, which is insane to me, how time has flown. We love to hear from you on those channels, but we know that the vast majority of you will listen in podcast. And if you're listening right now in podcast, thank you for subscribing and liking and sharing on any platform. That's our bread and butter here. It helps us to be able to keep the lights on. Also want to mention that when you're listening in podcast, you're getting ads. That's because it's free, a free download for you. So you will get ads. I hope you celebrate that and go, woohoo, they're paying for this, so I don't have to. But if that's hard for you for whatever reason, because you need to concentrate and you really want to listen to the content ad free, we have made a way for you to do that. Go to glow.fm/autism live. And for $5 a month, you can get everything that we do ad free. Okay. So let's jump into this topic because it's important to me. And I promised Upstate Suze that we were going to do it. So I want to do it. It's hard when you start to do a special diet. And let's face it, there are lots of special diets out there. No two kids are the same. No two needs for diet are the same. It comes with a certain amount of, like you really got to steel yourself and go, okay, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? How, what am I hoping to see? How am I going to track that? And how am I going to manage life? And life is filled with all kinds of challenges, right? But school is a place where we drop our children off and we don't have eyes on the situation. And it can be really, really frightening, overwhelming. It can make you feel powerless, right? Especially when you're trying to do something and you're trying to track. I always tell the story about my son wasn't in school when we started a special diet, but I started going to the YMCA and I would put him in the kinder care and they would have little tags that you could pin. He was little, he was 2.5, and you could pin the tag on him that said, don't feed, or you could say allergy to this or whatever. And I would put a tag on him that said, don't feed when I put him in kinder care. And but we had disclosed to the director of the YMCA and to the director of the kinder care that he had just gotten his diagnosis. Like we subscribed and 3 days later he got the diagnosis. So, and we went right back and said, is this going to be a problem? No. And we told the kinder care people, and it was a problem. It was just a problem. And apparently it was a big problem for the director. And I was asking if I could bring aides and people in so that they could show them, Anyway, she apparently didn't like that. So there was a day that I brought him in, clipped the do not feed thing on him, went to get on a machine, and within 5 minutes they came and said, he's hysterical and you got to take him out of here. And I went and he was hysterical. And it was the kind of behavior that we hadn't seen since we started the diet. And I was like, what is this? And I was demoralized. I was like, we weren't seeing this since we started the diet. Put him in the car, took him home, had a long weekend of behavior, was really bummed, but it was better on Monday. And so I took him back to the YMCA, put him in the kinder care, went and got on a machine, didn't even get the machine on. And they came and said, you have to take him home. And guess what? He's not welcome here anymore. At the YMCA, they told me my 2.5-year-old with autism, can you tell I'm still bitter about it? Anyway, I took him out of there. He was screaming. He was hysterical. He was hitting me in the head. I was trying to get him in his car seat. I was sobbing. I just had gotten him in the car seat and was standing there. I remember with my head on the top of the car, just sobbing. And this young man that worked in the kinder care came around the corner and he said to me, can I ask you a question? I'm just sobbing. And I said, yeah. And he goes, could this behavior have happened if somebody fed him a bunch of pretzels? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, when you were here on Friday and when you came in just now, after you left him and you put the do not feed sticker, the director of the kinder care sat him down and fed him pretzels until he was behaving this way. He's like, so I'm going to get in trouble for telling you. But I hugged that young man and he changed my life that day because I was discounting the diet. And I tell you this story because we don't always have control and it's hard. It's really hard to trust. So I'm going to give you some tools and things, but let's go ahead and start the PowerPoint here, Chris, because we got to start with the Serenity Prayer. And the Serenity Prayer says, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So I'm going to give you a bunch of tips and tricks that have worked to a certain degree for me at school, but, and here's the big but, you have to understand that there is going to be a margin of error. And you're going to have to decide how you want to treat that and how you want to hear if there's an infraction. And because people will try to hide it unless you are really clear that you're not going to blow your stack. Because I wanted to blow my stack at that woman. I was too upset and I went home, and we never went back. I understand that they changed things afterwards. I did, talk to the director of the whole place and said, I'm not a litigious person. I just like people to know what's happening in their business, but I didn't do anything about it. I just said we're not going to the YMCA. But I understand, I had a parent who a few years later had a miraculous experience with their child with autism at that very same YMCA. So I'm glad. I'm glad they learned. I'm glad they grew. And most YMCAs have amazing programs now for our kids. So, but all it takes is one person. It's not the organization, right? So same thing at school. And we kind of have to steel our guts to that. And you're going to have to decide what your level of comfort is and what your priorities are. So let's launch into number one, knowing that we're going to do the serenity prayer on everything. The first line of defense is you need to file paperwork with the school nurse. This is not just about letting people know that you're putting your child on a special diet. You need to fill out specific papers and you need to decide and talk to your doctor about how you want to proceed. If you're working with, for instance, a functional medicine doctor who's recommended that you go on the special diet that your child is starting, get a note from them and talk with them. Listen, I never want to tell you to lie, but I know when I go into a restaurant, they ask me, and I say I need to be gluten-free now. And they will ask me, is it an allergy or just a preference? Right? And I appreciate that because I say to them, it's an allergy. But for years, unless you said it was an allergy, they just assumed it was a preference and it wasn't that big of a deal. And you got to decide what language and decide between you and your doctor, what language you want to use to the school in order to make them understand the level of importance that you attach to this. And that's it's because it's personal, right? When my son started on a gluten-free, casein-free diet, my mom just really was having a hard time with it. She came to visit and my mother loved her treats. You know what I'm saying? And so she had me stop at a Dairy Queen so she could get a Blizzard or whatever it was, the thing that she wanted. And my son was probably 3 at that point, and she just thought it was terrible that as a mom, I wasn't allowing for him to have ice cream. Like, how can you go through life and never have ice cream? And so when I wasn't looking, she just, knowing my mother, and knowing my allergies, when I wasn't looking, she just put a mouthful of her Blizzard in my child's mouth because she wanted him to have the experience. And she thought, oh, he's going to love it. And of course, my child, who was sensitive to cold things, spit it out and started gagging and choking and, gonna vomit. And my mother was like, oh my God, what did I do? What did I do? And immediately fessed up to it. So, and then I had to stand there and say to her, because she was like, I don't want him to go through his whole life and never have ice cream. And I said, well, Mom, I don't know that he's going to go through his whole life and never have ice cream, but, he's 3. And what we now know is he can talk or he can have dairy. And so right now we're choosing the talking. And she was like, really? And I said, yes, you feed him dairy. He is not going to be able to find his words for like a week. Is that what you want for him? And then she understood, right? So you got to find the words with your team, and it's going to start on this paperwork with the nurse, because you can put on there, you can say, on a special diet, and you can list a whole bunch of things. And if you don't say the level of importance, I'm just going to tell you, they're not going to take it very seriously. They're going to be like, oh, these people are hippy dippy and that's not everybody, but all you need is one person to look at it and go, that's not really a rule. And then you have an infraction. And if you don't know, it can throw a lot of things off, because what you're really looking for is to greatly reduce or eliminate these things so that your child can be healthier and learn and grow. So, sometimes parents say it's an allergy, knowing that it's not a strict allergy that would cause anaphylaxis. But for school, if you say it's an allergy that can cause anaphylaxis, then they're going to be much more careful about it. They're still not going to be necessarily pristine. There are still things that go wrong. And one of the things that they're going to ask you on the form is, what do we do if there is an infraction? For me, because there were a lot of things that Jem was allergic to. So we had a lot of things that were on the list. And so we left a specific type of Benadryl. I had to get a note from the doctor so that they could give it to him, but they had the permission to give one dye-free Benadryl, and that they should immediately call me so that I could take him to the doctor if there was an infraction. That's what I did. That's not what you have to do, but you should decide what you want to do, and you put it on the nurse. The nurse will have forms because they can't give medicine, and nothing is official unless it's on that form. Here's the benefit of this. When you fill out the nurse's form and you say that automatically, it should, but I want you to check it at your next IEP meeting. It should be included in your IEP. It's under the section of health. And there's a spot where it says, does this child have, medical, any kind of special medical, and it'll include diet. Child cannot have da, 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 da. And you want to include ingesting and being exposed to. For instance, if your child is allergic to peanuts, that's going to change. For a lot of kids, it's not just ingesting. They can be in the same room with a kid having peanuts. So you decide the level with your doctor, but you need to fill out that paperwork for the nurse, even if it's just special diet, and then it will be included in your IEP. And that's important. Raisin wants to know, does your son still have the diet? No, he eats ice cream. My mother, if she were alive, would love it. He eats ice cream. He eats gluten. I will say he meters how much of that he has, because he will tell me, he's like, I had a little too much dairy yesterday and my stomach's feeling it, right? And I see kind of the way, I don't know, I have friends who were models for a lot of years, and like leading up to a shoot, they wouldn't have any salt in their diet, so they wouldn't be puffy, right? Just an awareness of, this is how my body works, this is how I want it to work, this is how I want to look, this is how I want to feel. And he makes those decisions for himself. But we go to a restaurant and he'll order something that has gluten. And I remember the first couple of times he did it, and I was like, what? And he was like, calm down, we're just trying something here. It was harder for me than it was for him. But no, he's not on the special diet at all. The one thing that he still doesn't eat, and we haven't had him retested for it, but he tested allergic to almonds, and we need to have him retested for that. Because every time we talk about it, I think both of us are like, oh man, but if he's allergic to it, like, it's just not a good idea with nuts to expose them to it in a trial like that. You really want to get tested. So, talking to the nurse and getting that all in file, really important. And once it's in the IEP, great, right? But don't think that that's the end game, right? Because just because something is in the IEP, let's just say that, the people in the lunch line, and they've never looked at your child's IEP unless you give it to them. And the teachers, they're not reading it every day, right? It's a big document. They have a lot of kids. The expectation that they will follow it because it's in the IEP, we should not have that expectation. However, having it in the IEP makes it enforceable in a way that if it's not there, you don't have that protection. So get it in the IEP. Let's go on and move on to the next one. So once it's in the IEP, and even while you're making it be in the IEP, it's really critical to give the entire team crystal clear instructions. And this is going to be so different based on what you're doing and your child's ecosystem in their own bodies. But, I know parents that do a laminated card, and they give it with a magnet on the back of it to everyone on the team with a picture of their child, So you give it to the lunch ladies, you give it to the custodial staff, you give it to the vice principal and the principal and the woman in the works in the front office, and certainly the teacher, and you give it to the teacher and say, can you include this in the file when you leave stuff for a substitute, right? And that's you doing the serenity prayer and taking control of what you can control. You can help them. You can make a little index card, laminated, put a magnet on the back with a picture of your child and what their diet restrictions are. You can do that. Does it mean that everybody's going to follow it? It does not. But it can give you a little bit of peace of mind, and it makes it a little bit more of a thing for them. It gives them a leg up. And that's what we want to do. We want to give our child the best chance, and we want to give the staff the best chance to adhere to the plan that you have for the food. But we're not done. There's so much more that we're going to do to this. Okay, so let's go on to number 3. We add that plan for infractions that I was mentioning before. So you have to work with your doctor and figure out what that is. If it involves medication, they're going to want a doctor's note. They can't accept medication from you, nor can they give medication. And you want to be really careful about this, because if you tell them that it's an allergy, then they're going to think there's an EpiPen involved. And if there's no EpiPen involved, they're going to get really, and you do not want your child shot with an EpiPen if they don't need it. Let's be clear about that. So talk to your doctor. Get it clear, get the expectations clear. That's you taking control of what you can take control over, and be very clear about what those expectations are. So if it's in the IEP and it's filed with the nurse, chances are they will follow it, and they cannot give medication unless they, looked, because there are things that kids are allergic to. Okay, so on to the next one. So I think you got to get ahead of the issue, right? One of the questions that the mom who wrote in said, think about all the freaking things that happen at school. Like, we're at the end of the school year, and I'm going to tell you, a former teacher here, and every day somebody's coming in with cupcakes or those frozen popsicles that come in the plastic strip. Some wonderful mom just decided, I'm going to donate to the whole class without telling anybody, and I'm going to bring in all that artificial color and flavor and sugar and woohoo. So I think it's really important that we always have a snack that's a substitute for anything that's going on. Oh my phone just went off on a silver alert. Okay, that got us all awake. Sorry about that. Okay, so it's up to you what works for you. But one of the things that we did, there was a whole year when my son was really into Lara bars, and I have the picture of the cashew cookies there. What I like about cashew cookies and what I like about Lara bars is that there's only a few ingredients, and they're very clean about it. Now, a lot of the Lara bars have almonds, which my son cannot have, but this particular Lara bar, it's dates and cashews, both of which he could have. And because it's a protein with a sugar, we found that it metabolized okay for him. They come and they're good for quite a while. I would buy a big box and leave it with the teacher, so that if something happened and somebody came in, he had a treat at the ready in case of those emergencies. Now, if we go on to the next one, there's any number of things that you could leave for your child that would be good. But best case scenario is that it's a non-perishable treat that your child actually likes. I also think, since we're talking about that it's worthwhile. And my kindergarten teacher brought this up to me, and it was right around there was just a lot of lockdowns that were going on. And I hate that we live in that environment where our kids are on lockdown, sometimes just as an exercise and sometimes for real. I appreciate that at the schools. I have a fuzzy that's tracking me. It's just wild over here today. We have schools that, if something happens, they will go on lockdown just for safety. And I greatly appreciate that. I really do. I hate that it's a reality, but I appreciate them doing that. But there was one instance where it wasn't at my son's school, but the next school over, they were on lockdown for 4 hours, and they were on lockdown during lunch. And um, good teachers always have something for the kiddos just in case. And the kindergarten teacher called me after that and said, I thought about Jem and I don't know what I would have. And there was another school that was not near us, but they had been on lockdown for like 10 hours. And so I realized, oh, okay, I need to send something. So we put together, we had this bucket that could seal. And we put together some things to put in the bucket that could be not just treats, but meals, And it was a lot of gluten-free crackers and some tins of tuna. And he was really into salmon right then. So we sent tins of salmon that had the thing that you just pull up so that you don't need a can opener. And I'm trying to remember what else we put in there. At the time, there was a big gluten-free revolution, and there were little non-perishable things that were shelf stable that you could put in lunches. I don't know if they still make them. I haven't seen them around, but you can go to some place like Whole Foods. They would be most likely to have it, or look on Amazon. I know we went camping 2 summers ago. We went hiking. Let's not gild the lily here. We went hiking in the Arches National Park in Utah, and we were going to not be anywhere near a restaurant or a grocery store from like really early in the morning till late night. And so there was all kinds of things that I was finding. At the time, there were little Tetris packs of hummus, these little tricorn packs that, were shelf stable. And you just cut the corner and then you could squeeze it on a cracker. I haven't seen those lately, but there's all kinds of other things. And if you look up camping gluten-free, you will find more stuff that's shelf stable. But it's a good idea to have something like that. And I would have something that's at least 3 meals that's there. And it can be used, you tell the teacher, it can be used in case of an emergency. If something happens and their lunch gets strewn all over the play area by accident, there's always a backup. And it gives you some peace of mind knowing that that's there for the child. And then on the last day of school, you pick your bucket up and you take it home and you eat the things in it and you pack a new one for the fall. But it's worthwhile to do, and it helps the staff know, I know what to do if this child needs to eat. So really important. Okay, on to the next one. If you're going to send food to school, like the Lara bars and the such, it is so important that you label it like your life depends upon it. I remember the year that I made, because there were a lot of popsicle things that were happening, right? And at the time, there weren't the Outshine bars, and they weren't, I don't know, I wish I knew what the name of them was, but now there's a company that makes the frozen sticks, and they're colors. They're not Dayglow colors, but it's all natural. It's just frozen juice. I just want to kiss these people on the lips for doing this, because back in the day, we didn't have that. Now I would get that, but if you get it, you're going to have to wrap it really well and put stickers on it. Because I was making homemade popsicles, like in the little, the thing, and sending them in their thing to the school. And because, classrooms don't have a refrigerator, they had to put it in the teacher's lounge. And it said popsicles for my son and had his name on them. The teachers ate them. The teachers just ate them. And that's human nature, my friends. So I would tell you, wrap them really well, market special diet, because sometimes that will stop some people, but send more than one, because when they went to get the popsicles for my son, when the other kids were having popsicles, guess what? There were no popsicles. But we're going to get to that. What happens when all of that happens? Because I got the best out for you. It's coming up. But label like your life depends upon it. And if you find that the stuff keeps being eaten, I think if it's stuff that's staying in the classroom, you're probably going to be fine. But when I have been in teacher lounges before, it's chaos. It's starving people who can't leave campus to go get something, and stuff gets eaten. It's just the lowest of the low as far as but people, they get hungry, they eat. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, so But what we want, what we'll ask for, and you can ask for this during the IEP meeting. I've never seen somebody be able to get this written into the IEP because they know they're going to fail at it, right? I feel that that's the reason. I don't know that because it's hard, and I'll talk about why it's hard. But you are going to ask for reasonable notice regarding food in the classroom. Now, my son had the best kindergarten teacher in the entire world, and it's really important that you get to be friends with the teacher and that you be talking with them and you volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. I just can't say that enough. Volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. Be there, be a positive presence. Show them that you're not just about, I need this special treatment, that you're also invested in the school, that you're invested in your child, you're invested in the teacher, you're invested in the whole class, that you're nice to the other children. It goes a long way. It really, really does. And my son's kindergarten teacher was the best. And we had this arrangement. I said, if ever you're going to, food is a primary reinforcer, and which means that it's powerful. So whenever a teacher can have food be a part of the lesson, boy, the kids are all paying attention and awake, and older kids put their phones down because it's food, right? I love when in classrooms, for instance, when it's time to teach fractions, they order pizza. And they cut the pizza and they're like, okay, so this is a half, right? And it's more meaningful because it's real life and it smells good and you have their attention, right? But then they eat the pizza. And if you didn't know that they were doing on that day and your kid is sitting there and everybody else is having pizza, right? So you ask for reasonable time. And you say to them, because I will take the responsibility of getting something different for the child. And that everybody breathes a sigh, because there are lots of parents who come in and say, my child can't have cupcakes, so nobody can have cupcakes. And I know, because I've been a teacher and I've been in the teacher's lounge, teachers really dislike that. If it's because of a peanut allergy, they get it a little bit more, but I'm going to be honest with you, they consider it a pain in the you-know-what. And nobody wants their kid to be considered the pain in the you-know-what. And it's really unfair because that's a life and death issue with a peanut allergy. But when it's more than that, when it's a gluten thing, boy, they're like, it's a gluten thing and you're not going to let the rest of the kids have cupcakes. Food is a primary reinforcer. People get very emotional about it. So if it's possible for all the kids to have whatever they're having, and that you say, I will take the personal responsibility. If you give me enough notice, I will bring something that's similar. Like if you tell me that they're having chocolate cupcakes, I will bring what looks like a chocolate cupcake for my child that's specially packaged, that's theirs, and you don't have to do a thing. Teachers love that. Except they'll say that they're going to give you the prior notice, and sometimes they can't. Sometimes the day gets away from them and they're, lesson planning and they're behind the eight ball and they realize, oh no, I wasn't able to give the parent notice, right? And I remember the day that the kindergarten teacher called me and said, oh, Shannon, I forgot to tell you that today we're using M&Ms to count. And then the kids are going to eat the M&Ms, and I'm just, I'm so mad at myself. And I said, okay, because I had done something else and prepared my child, and it was all okay. So I'm going to give you that tip in a minute. But you ask for reasonable notice. And if you make it clear to them, the reason why I'm asking for reasonable notice is I will take the responsibility of having whatever the substitute treat is for my child. And I do think it's worthwhile for your child to have something that looks similar. And it's more possible now than it ever was before. Is it a lot of work for you? It is, but it's a social thing. So if they're all having gluten-free pizza, if they're all having pizza, you show up with gluten-free pizza, or you send it with your child, and your child happily is eating their pizza, and it's not a thing, right? And when we can do that, that's great. When we can take control and do that, sometimes we can't. So we have to have a plan for that. But you ask for the reasonable notice. And if you're somebody who's volunteering and you said to the teacher, what do you need? And they say Kleenex. And every time you come, you bring a box of Kleenex and you say, I know you need Kleenex in your classroom. It actually helps your child because then people are wiping their noses instead of wiping it on the counter so that your child's getting sick, right? Is a box of Kleenex. I know it's an expense, but I'm all about the bribery. Well, all about the bribery. If it makes our children healthy and more included, and you got the teacher looking out for your kiddo, yes, a box of Kleenex. I'm all about that. Okay, so on to the next one, because we're getting to the, so provide the appropriate lookalikes. And here's the thing, we got to go back to that serenity prayer, because I cannot tell you the number of times that for a birthday party or something else, and I do this for birthday parties too, I'll say to the mom, so what are you serving? And they'll say, oh, we're having hot dogs and we're doing this. And I go, great. And I bring the hot dog. So I don't bother her with, are the hot dogs gluten-free? Are they, I just don't bother. I bring the very clean hot dog for him that's already cooked. And I bring the gluten-free bun and we're off to the races. Except I cannot tell you the number of times that I've shown up to the party and the mom goes, oh, I told you that 3 days ago. And then we switched to pizza. Right? And that's just the thing sometimes. That's just what happens. And the same thing happens at school. You know, my child wasn't doing popcorn and they were going to have a big movie thing. And they said, oh, and we're serving popcorn. Is that going to be okay? And he was corn-free then. He's not anymore. And he was only corn-free for, I think, 1.5 years, 2 years. But we took, I don't know if they still make it, but Namaste made a pizza dough a pizza dough mix that you could mix just with water. And I would make it into biscuits. I made it into all kinds of things that had herbs in it. It tasted great. But so I would make just little blobs and stick them on the cookie sheet and cook them. And they look like popcorn. You put them in a bag and it looks just like popcorn. And he would sit and eat these things and nobody was any the wiser. So I spent all that time making the popcorn. And then instead they decided to have those horrible popsicles, right? So sometimes that happens and you have to be prepared for anything. But I do think it's worthwhile to expend the energy trying to have the lookalike, because most of the time it works. And when it does, it was so good, because there's my child with all the other children enjoying his food, and it's just fantastic, right? But there are going to be times when it doesn't work out. So I think it's the next one, if you'll go, Chris. Teach, reward your child food boundaries. So your really strong line of defense is teaching your child what they can and cannot have, and what the rules are and what the rewards are. So we spent a lot of time prompting Jem and teaching him to say, when he was real little, I can't have that. I have allergies. So when the mom is there and like, here, honey, here's your cupcake, that he would refuse it himself, because the teacher turns away for a second and it happens. Now, this is a hard thing for some kiddos, and it's not a perfect thing, right? But I'm here to tell you, if you make the reward big enough, their ability to have that boundary gets stronger. So what we gave Jem phrases and we changed it over the years. But what we said to him was, here's the deal. If all the kids are getting a treat and you don't have that treat, if that treat doesn't get to come to you for whatever reason, then if you come home and tell mom, you get the biggest treat. And that treat would be geared towards whatever he was super into. But sometimes it meant we went right to the store and got a toy. So it turned into that he would be thrilled if they brought something and didn't tell me. And the teacher would be like, oh no, your mom's going to be so mad. And Jem would go, it's okay. I won't eat it. Not a problem for me, because he knew he was going to get a Lego that night. You know what I'm saying? So whatever is appropriate for your child. By the way, I also, while I was teaching my son, because for a while it was, I can't eat that, I have allergies. Then we taught him how to ask questions. Well, does it have dairy? Does it have gluten in it? And most of the time the adults didn't know what gluten was, right? But he knew. So we just kept educating him up so he knew what the words were. So funny side story. When we first met, the birds, and he and Kobe just really hit it off, and Kobe was so sweet to him. And we met them at this concert that Kobe was performing in, and they had dinner together, and they discovered that they were gluten-free together. And Rachel Bird, his mom, was like, oh, they have a gluten-free bun. He can eat here. And, I've already vetted it, and Kobe's having this. And they just enjoyed having their burgers together at this restaurant before the concert. And so as we were leaving the concert, Rachel said, oh, by the way, it's Kobe's birthday and we're having his birthday party. Why doesn't Jem come to the birthday party? We said, okay, great. They were going to do miniature golf. It was a great birthday party. And we went there, and it was the first time. Jem was just getting a little bit older. And so I knew pretty much everybody at the party, and I could sit there and not follow him around as they were golfing. And at one point he came running up to me and he goes, Mom, I need you to talk to Kobe's mother because she offered me cake. And I said, I can't have that. And I'm allergic to things. And she said, well, what can't you have? And he said, well, I told her I can't have dairy. And she said, oh no, this cake doesn't have dairy. And he said, and then I told her I can't have gluten. And she said, this cake doesn't have gluten or dairy in it. And he's like, but then I told her I can't have almonds. And she's not sure, but she's on the phone calling the baker right now to make sure that it doesn't have almonds. Mom, I need you to come and talk to her to make sure I can have this cake. He was so excited, and it became the biggest bonding experience because when I walked across the little golfing area to talk to Rachel, who I had known for 2 seconds at that point, I was like, who are you and why do you have a gluten-free cake? And where did you get this from? Because at that point, we couldn't just order them up. And we had such a bonding experience. And for the first time at a birthday party, my son had a piece of cake. It was amazing, right? But he had grilled her like fish and then came back to me to check before. And I want to say he was probably 11 or 12 at that point, right? Now, he makes all his own decisions. And much later, when he was 16 through 18, well, we were in COVID then, but, he would ask questions and make decisions for himself about what was safe and what wasn't. And now he eats what he chooses to eat. But my point is we need to teach our children as much as we possibly can. And for some of our kids, it's hard because they want the sweets and they'll just take it, right? But if we make a big enough reward, and it has to be, if it's that intense, it has to be instant. So you can even have with your ABA team work with having a treat go by and them not taking it and getting a big reward of something else. It takes time, and depending on the kiddo, it'll take, different amounts of time and different methods of teaching, but it's important not to neglect it. If you have a kiddo that you're like, oh, my kiddo doesn't understand, I would encourage you to ask your ABA team and create a plan to get them to understand because it's worthwhile for safety. Okay, moving on to the next one. Number 10, have an emergency go bag. And this is really for school and for everything else. When we think about, oh my gosh, the number of emergencies that we've had here in Los Angeles County in the last, 7 years, I think it's really important if you have a child with any kind of special diet or special needs, they have special medicine that they have to have. I know a lot of people call it the bug out bag. Because it's something that they do in the military that, but just think about it. It's just meeting life on life's terms. So if you were to put in a bug out bag, a change of underwear, a change of socks, if there's a pair of shoes that, aren't in heavy rotation because maybe they're a little worn, but they still fit, put those in the bag. A change of, a clothes, a jacket. How many times have you been out and been someplace and you ended up staying longer than you meant to, and now it's cold? Having a jacket, having a hat, having water that's in the bag, and something for your child to eat. Listen, when I first had my baby, the diaper bag thing was a hard thing for me. I was 41 and I wasn't the kind of mom that was like, oh, the diaper bag, my mother made me something to function as a diaper bag that didn't look like a diaper bag because I was like, diaper bag, who wants to be carrying a diaper bag around? but you needed diapers and you needed wipes and you needed baby food. And, I took a lot of heat in the first 6 months of his life because we'd be someplace, we'd be out, and I'd go, I got to go home. Now he was being breastfed, and I found ways that I could, find a room that you could go in and breastfeed, and it was better. But, my mom and my sister were on me like white on rice saying, you got to be prepared. You need to have a diaper bag. It's kind of that. We still need a diaper bag. And I would say to any parent, special needs or no, you should have a bug out bag in every car that you take your child in, just because. You find yourself at McDonald's, and even kids that are older can have an accident where they spill stuff on themselves. And then it's like, okay, well, what do? Do you go home? No, I have a change of shirt. I have a whole change of clothes in my car. It's not that hard to put it together, and it takes up a little bit of space in the trunk, but it's there and it's peace of mind, and having food in it in case of emergency. So if you are at work and they call you the morning of and they say, oh, we're doing this thing at school, you have something in your trunk you can always feed your child. I think it's comes under the heading of things that you can be in control of. And then it just becomes a thing to change it every once in a while, because your child's going to grow and will grow out of those clothes. And, food doesn't stay good forever. But if you make it things that are non-perishable, it'll be there for you. And we have so much to worry about, right? And if you just do a little bit of prep and make sure that, that you have something at school for your child for a treat, and you have something at school in case of an emergency, and you have something in your trunk in case of emergency, I promise you that you'll go, I have this. I have this. It doesn't mean that it's going to go perfectly, but I have a plan for when it doesn't go perfectly. And I want to go back to that for just a second, that I think it's really important when you get friends with the staff and with the teacher that that you have a conversation. And for me, it went something like this, where I said, here's the thing, this is very important to us. And we see that it's really helping him. And I told them the YMCA story. And I said, but I'll tell you something. I know that you're human beings and you're people. And you don't have eyes in the back of your head, and you can't be in control of everything that ever happens. So here's the deal that I would like to make to you. My child's health and well-being is more important than whether you make a mistake. So I promise you, I will not freak out, and I will not hold it against you if you make a mistake, if you just tell me in a timely manner. Because for me, the worst case scenario is that they blow it. Your child does have an anaphylactic response, and they're afraid to call you and let you know because they blew it, right? I don't want that. So I would have a very private side question. Just say, just so you know, I'm the kind of person I'd rather know so that I can help to deal with it. And for me, that's trust, and it would mean the world to me. And there were a couple of times that they had to tell me, okay, so this happened and we didn't realize it. And it was usually, I'll be honest with you, when he asked and somebody believed that it was gluten-free and it wasn't, and he survived. The worst infraction that we had in like 16 years was the very first time that I was brave enough to leave my child to go to an autism conference to do interviews. And my mother flew in for it. She was going to be with us anyway, but she flew in 2 days early. And I was like, I prepared food, I froze food, I did all of this stuff. And my mother begged me not to name him Jem because it was going to be confusing. Jim and Jem, it was. But I went to the airport with my producer. I called my mother from the gate, getting ready to leave on the plane. And I said, how are things going? And she said, everything's going great. We're just sitting here eating this pasta that you made that I got out of the freezer and I defrosted. I said, what pasta? What are you talking about, Mom? And she goes, this pasta that you made, it's fantastic. And Jem is he's eaten a whole bunch of it. And I said, Mom, look at the label. What does it say on the label? And she said, oh, it's for me and for Oh, it says it's for Jim. It's not for Jem. Oh, is he eating gluten and dairy? And I said, yes, he is. And I'm getting on the plane and I was like, look at his arms. He was already breaking out in hives. So, he was on Benadryl. The doctor was called in case of emergency. He survived. My mother, of course, said, well, it's your fault for naming him. And I told you not to name him that because it would be confusing. And here it is. That was the biggest infraction that we ever had. Um, you know, Now when I make pasta, I just make it gluten-free. I just don't make gluten pasta anymore. I just don't. Even when we have parties, I make gluten-free ziti and everybody eats it and nobody knows it's gluten-free. There we have it. So that's really in a nutshell. Does anybody have any questions about any of that? I find that restaurants, it's funny how the pendulum goes, right? That for so long, people didn't know what gluten was. We still have that in some restaurants, right? But more and more, when you say gluten in a restaurant, people will tell you, yep, it's totally fine. And it's gluten free and yada, yada, yada. And I find that that's not always true. So you always want to keep an eye on things. And if you see any behavior afterwards, just keep an eye to make sure that your child is healthy, but you might see some behavior afterwards. What I tend to like and enjoy is there are a couple of websites that um, are mostly populated by people with celiac. And if you look up a restaurant and let's say you put Chipotle gluten free, and you'll find in the Google search that these websites will come up from the folks that are celiac and they'll rate the restaurant and people will say, I went to this restaurant at this location, here's what happened, and I didn't get sick. So that's one person's experience. But when you see like 100 of them and people go, it's great, gluten-free, dedicated bakery, it gives you a little bit of peace of mind. But you'll see that there are people that are like, yeah, they must have contaminated it with something because I had a reaction. And then that this may not be the safest place to go. It's hard. It's really hard for restaurants because you've got the wheat and you've got the gluten-free, and it's not perfect. It's not perfect. When I go to places, I especially if it's like one of those places like Chipotle or a sandwich place, or they have the custom pizza places where I say, can you please change your gloves? And you can tell if it's a well-trained place because they'll automatically, you say gluten-free and they're walking over to get it. They're taking their gloves off, putting a new pair on. But don't be afraid to ask for it if they're not, because there's all kinds of contamination. I remember when I was teaching college, back when I would still eat dairy, and I love a soft ice cream. Oh my gosh. And I was on a break. I was teaching college, and I went to the student union, and it was one of my students who was making, and they got the hairnet on, and they're making the ice cream, and they thought they were going to make me such a great ice. They made it a little too big, and it was lopsided. And so he had his plastic gloves on, and so he just took his plastic glove and put it on my ice cream cone and righted it. Right as he was doing something else, I think he touched his hair and his face and whatever. And, I was like, oh yeah, I'm not eating that. You could have just licked it. Like, why don't you just like, I'm just saying plastic gloves aren't everything, but usually it's a good line of defense. Having said all of that, it is easier to be on a special diet now than it's ever been before. There are more people that are sensitive to that. You will meet some amazing people along the way. Even when Jem was little and he was in preschool, and I thought, oh, I'm going to have the dickens of a time explaining this to the preschool teacher, and came in the first day and she was like, oh, honey, I have celiac. I got you. And she taught me things, right? So you will meet those people too. Or sometimes, somebody has a child that's celiac. More and more, you will meet people who have a little bit of knowledge, or a little bit of sensitivity. But when you meet a teacher or a staff member who's rolling their eyes, I think it's important to call that out. Try to see if you can win them over with Kleenex or something else, whatever it is that they need. But if you can't, don't be afraid to move teachers. That was something I really was opposed to and didn't do. And it's probably the biggest regret that I have, that there was a teacher and everybody told me, move him. And I didn't, and wish I had. You don't want to be convincing people their whole school year to look at them like a person. That's a waste of your child's time. So, all right, we're about out of time here, kids. But is there anybody that has a question about anything that we have said here? And if you can't think of it now, but you can think of it later, you know that you can always write to me. My email is shannon@autism-live.com. And look, we got through. I was breathless a couple of times, but we got through. So that's really good. Let me tell you a little bit about what's happening the next 2 weeks, because it's a little bit different. We don't usually let Chris go on vacation. Let's be honest, he's just so valuable that we just, but obviously he gets vacation, and it's important that he have vacation. We're also finishing up the studio. So for the next 2 weeks, we have recorded shows for you, and we have taken the time to record new shows for you that are amazing. I recorded one yesterday, for instance. All of them are wonderful. As I think back on them, some amazing stuff. So don't miss out on that. If you don't want to watch them when they premiere, which is on the regular time, 10 a.m., subscribe either to the podcast or on YouTube or on Facebook, and they'll show up in your inbox. But they are brand new shows, you guys, and they're good shows. Oh, very good question. They want to know, ma'am, is there an online test for autism? You can go on and you can look at some of the screening things that they do. Like Dr. Graham Pichet did a great show last week on Tuesday about diagnosis, and I would encourage you to go check that out. And she talked about the fact that there is something called the M-Chat. And that if you Google that, you should be able to find the questions. And they're the screening questions that the pediatrician does with a very young child to see if they should, it's not a diagnosis, but if they should go and get a diagnosis, go and seek to be looked at by a professional. There are a couple of other, if you just Google online and say autism screening, or I think you could probably put even, am I autistic? I know there was one that was very popular about 6 months ago. Here's the problem. I took the screening and it said that I am heavily impacted with autism. So for me, that invalidates its results. So take it all with a grain of salt. But if you answer some basic questions and you still feel like maybe there is, then you want to seek a diagnosis. I will tell you that there are professionals that can now diagnose via like Zoom, so that you don't have to actually be in the room with them, but the child needs to be in the room with you and they need to be observing, and they'll ask you to do things and observe the child. And that is an acceptable format in which an expert can look at your child. And that's true for adults as well, that there are some amazing people that diagnose adults that are happy to do it via Zoom. They have to be licensed in the state that you are, but there's a lot of people that are and can. And so that's very viable. But if you're not sure about yourself or your child, you can find some screening questions online. But I would say to you, get on a waiting list to get a diagnosis anyway. Because at the very worst, if there are enough things that you have questions about, then whoever it is, whether it's you, your child, or your adult child, or your teenage child, then chances are that there's an area where they need support. They may not qualify for the autism diagnosis, but there's an area where they could be doing better if they have the right support. And if you go and get the diagnosis, if you go to get a diagnosis and they say, well, you don't qualify for autism, they will say, but there is a weakness in this area, and here's the support that would help with that, whatever that is. Diagnosis needed for Asperger's adult? You mean a re-diagnosis, that they already had a diagnosis of Asperger's and now have not been re-diagnosed? I'm going to assume and write in and tell me. Here's the thing with that. No, unless they're having difficulties or unless they want to get supports. And that's true for everyone, by the way. The diagnosis the benefit of it is that it gives you access to supports. I can't state how important it is. You're still the same person. I do think for some adults who've never had a diagnosis, I hear the phrase all the time, oh my gosh, I'm starting to understand myself for the first time. And I think that can't be understated, right? That's pretty important. But for most people, it's access to services. She is, I don't know what HSP is. What does that stand for? I don't know. I'm trying to run through all the things that HSP could be. Tell me what those letters stand for. It's probably going to be, I'm going to go, duh, but I just can't figure it out in my head right now. Are you saying she's in hospital? Is that what HSP stands for? I don't know. But if she needs support, it is very worthwhile. Oh, but in India, it will be stereotype, not support. Well, I want to say to you, highly sensitive person, thank you. The guest that I interviewed yesterday, their show will be on 2 weeks from today. One of the stories that she tells is about a family that brought their adult daughter to her program from India, and that she was able to get supports and help for her, and she is now living independently. So you won't want to miss that show. That's 2 weeks from today. And I'm so sorry, because even here there are some stereotypes, and it's so frustrating, right? But you don't have to disclose the diagnosis. You can go get a diagnosis and not tell anybody. But if there is any possibility of support, and it might just be that the person diagnosing says to you, here's what would be helpful to her. Because let's remember, when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So it's not like I could just say to you, oh, well, she needs X, Y, or Z. We need to figure out what she needs and help her with that. There's also an amazing mom that, oh gosh, I can't think what the name of her podcast is, but her daughter is Siri. And if you look up my name is Siri, Siri. Her mom, she's also from India, and she has a daughter that oh my gosh, what a story. But she might be a great resource for you. And she does an amazing podcast about supporting. And most of the stuff that this mom has done in the adult years has been the mom finding it, the mom implementing all the support. So she would be a great resource for you. So just look up My Name is Siri. They did a documentary. There's a website. My Name is Siri, Siri. And check that out. I have a feeling that you guys will be fast friends. Okay. We're past time now, although I'm loving talking to you, and I hope that you'll come back and that we can figure out exactly what she needs, because that's what's important for all of these individuals. They have the right to help and support for them to lead their best lives. Yeah. Thank you. All right, you guys, we're out of time. So you'll see me the next 2 weeks, and I'll be on the chat. But during this next 2 weeks, guess what happens? On Monday, my son is graduating from college. I don't have words. I only have gratitude. But I'll be back in that first week of June to talk about how amazing that was. I'm on Facebook. You can friend me on Facebook. You can see we'll be posting pictures. It's a pretty big deal. I can't tell you how excited and humbled and grateful I am. And we'll be finishing getting the studio all up. So hopefully sometime in that first 2 weeks of June, we'll be totally back in the studio. And I'll have a son that's a college graduate. What will I do with my time? Thank you. What will I do with my time? And already people are writing to me saying, so, what job is he going to? And I'm like, okay, he got a degree in screenwriting. It's not like that. So Anyway, well, one more step on the rung. He'll figure it out and we'll help support him while he figures it out. But I appreciate all of you. And Memorial Day will happen in the interim. We will have a show to play on Memorial Day. You don't want to miss that. And we will talk with you soon. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much. See you next time.